I think we forget that we're temporary visitors on planet Earth, and so far we've done an excellent job of mismanaging the finite resources on the planet. And if, in our terms, in this context, finite is the availability of land for us to live and work on, play on. So land availability, we need to be bringing brownfield back into use.
Taylor Woodrow in 2003 developed 62% of all its houses on brownfield land, raising year on year 64 than 68% last year. It's much easier to get planning permission on brownfield than greenfield, and it forms the bulk of Taylor Woodrow's housing business moving forward.
The government has a plan to considerably increase the number of houses built in the UK, and brownfield sites form a very useful and sustainable source of land for development. Brownfield redevelopment is important because it provides the opportunity during the development process to investigate potentially contaminated land and to remediate it where necessary.
The approach up until relatively recently is the answer to all remediation for all sites is dig and dump. That isn't the message. It isn't sustainable. It won't in the future be economically viable either.
The manufacturing base has generally fallen away to competition in Southeast Asia and other places. That's left quite a number of post-industrial derelict sites. Coupled with that, we have a greater demand for housing. We have change in the population dynamics in the UK such that there are more single people, more people wanting to live in individual properties. That's fueled demand and property boom and spiralling house prices.
And there is a huge responsibility upon the developers to make sure that the land that they develop is safe for human habitation and that they remove the risks that are out there in the environment today. If they don't, then the responsibility will clearly fall to the local authorities. They will have to fund it and it will come out of the public purse, and no one wants to go down that route.
I've got to say that without regeneration through development, without the push to brownfield regeneration, particularly for housing, we'll only deal through the regulatory route with fractions of a percent of the legacy of contamination we have in this country. Through regeneration and development, we'll deal with tens of percents of that legacy. So it really is critically important, not only locally, but nationally.
Alternative remediation techniques are not only more environmentally sustainable, but also potentially quicker and more cost-effective than traditional methods. A good example of this notion put in practice was a remediation scheme developed by RSK Asks for Miller Homes at a former spark plug and ceramics factory in Rugby. An innovative combination of in-situ multi-phase extraction and an ex-situ chemical oxidation technique meant that remediation could commence while the factory remained operational, and that the developer could gain site access 6 months earlier than anticipated.
We looked at the distribution of contaminants across the site and the nature of the contamination, and we came up with the idea of essentially splitting the site into two different parts. The northern and central part of the site had fairly localised contamination in hotspots, whereas there was more general contamination over the southern part of the site. And what we recommended, and Miller's accepted our recommendation, was that in the northern part of the site we would excavate the soils and take them to the southern part of the site for treatment, thereby enabling us to hand the northern part of the site to them to start construction at an early stage.
We thought it may be easier to excavate the soils, place it into a treatment bed, and then treat the soil in an ex situ manner where we had full control over the oxidation process.
The difficult thing with this approach of chemical oxidation is to actually make sure that we get the oxidant integrally and intimately mixed with the soil.
We were to use a windrow turning machine, and it completely mixes the soil and of course mixed in the oxidant as well, so you get really intimate contact. We just mix the soil by running the windrow turner backwards and forwards through the soil to get 100% contact. This technique is called multi-phase extraction. It's in effect almost acting like a vacuum cleaner in its simplest terms. We're using a relatively small diameter hose extended down into a well, slotted all the way from the unsaturated zone down 6 metres to the bottom of the sand aquifer. We place this hose with a lance attached to it, and we lower that down the well till it hits the groundwater surface. We then apply a high vacuum of about 500 millibars, half an atmosphere, is applied to the end of that lance. You imagine it then really sucks the groundwater into the pipe, and then that is transported right back to the treatment plant. That vacuum then propagates into the aquifer itself, and so we can start to reach out beyond just where the well is. We can reach out several metres away from that well and start recovering vapour and groundwater and any free product present, and draw that to the well itself.
What I like about this is that, Miller Homes have looked into all the various options and gone with the options that are environmentally friendly.
From a group perspective, it's very, very high up on the agenda. We have to actually produce corporate social responsibility charter. That's something that we have to take forward and actually publicise. And again, with certain directives that are coming through from government, it's something we have to take very, very seriously for the environment.
Sometimes a pioneering approach isn't necessary, and a relatively simple remediation technique combined with the reuse of on-site materials can pay great dividends for the developer. At a 3-acre former oil depot in Llanbradach, Glamorgan, RSK Asks devised a 6-month turnkey bioremediation programme that enabled the phased release of 2/3 of the site, so that Taylor Woodrow could begin site works 3 months earlier than anticipated. All excavated materials were reused, with treated soil being laid to raise the site level to conform to the Environment Agency's flood protection requirements.
As a reputable company, Taylor Woodrow always seek ways of recycling all materials as much as possible on site, so that we aid the environment and to help protect the environment. And we've done so on this particular development, where we've reused the crushed concrete, we've reused the contaminated soils by remediating the soils and to reuse it, whereas maybe 10-15 years ago that material would have had to have left site and gone to landfill sites, which of course is not the way forward.
The question of waste creates uncertainty, the question of clean-up targets creates uncertainty, methods of remediation and their applicability lead to uncertainty. And there is a conflict between different regulations. The waste regulations, the way they're interpreted at the moment, basically work against using sustainable site-based methods of remediation, which can be the most cost-effective solutions to many of the problems that we have on site. And so it's important that we find a way of actually resolving these regulatory problems, these conflicts that we have, to make the whole approach work in the sustainable way that would be best.
Developers need to consider spending their money at the front end of the process, the risk-based end, rather than saying, we'll just dig everything up and take it off-site. That's not sustainable. We've had a lot more success in recent times with that approach. It's still a challenge, and there are still developers who feel that the risk-based assessment isn't necessary, or that they need to only pay it scant regard. It's absolutely critical. For their clients, it's money well spent.
There's now an argument that even if it's contaminated but not even dug up, that it's waste buried in the ground. This is a case known as the Van der Waal case at Europe. Now there's work underway to try and improve or refine the definition there, because what we really want in overarching sustainability terms is intelligent use of material that is a risk-based and proportionate response.
Ultimately, it's the government's policy and the government's agendas on brownfield and housing redevelopment that are at stake here. There are significant obstacles in the way, and it's in everyone's interests, the private sector, the regulators, the government, to remove those obstacles and to make the process more streamlined and smooth.
I feel we're in danger of missing a trick if we're not careful. If we need to keep at that cutting edge with the innovation, and because of the tremendous legacy we have of industrial pollution, we've certainly got so many problem areas where we could be developing our own solutions. So that I think there's a great opportunity in the UK to develop the market.
The worst case scenario really is, in my view, that you wouldn't be able to regenerate, you wouldn't be able to develop. There just aren't the greenfield sites any longer that we've seen used in the past. So my answer is blunt. There isn't an alternative. We've got to make use of the sites we have. It's very
Well, we're in the fortunate position that being involved with government task forces and the Home Builders Federation, we're aware of the issues that developers have to face, how they're seen by the regulators and the way they can be resolved. And a very important part of what we bring to a developer is this understanding and the ability to work with them to provide cost-effective and sustainable solutions. We understand the obstacles, we understand the difficulties the Environment Agency and the planning authorities have, and we can work closely with all parties to try and make sure that we come up with the best solution for an individual site.